I can still hear it scratching. I know it isn't there, not anymore, but sometimes I forget. Sometimes my imagination is stronger than my memory, and I can hear it scratching. I wake in the middle of the night. It's always in the middle of the night. I wake up with a lump in my throat and a cold sweat urges me to look. I walk to the attic door and tug it open. I lower the ladder to the ground before scaling it one shaky step at a time. Then I peek inside. Every time it isn't there, every time it isn't looking back, I breathe a sigh of relief. But one time, not long ago, it was there. It was looking back. I came home after vacationing in Texas. I was running away from the Wisconsin winter. 3 weeks in the sun sounded like a good idea at the time. The house was the same as the day I had left it. The sink was full of dishes, my bed was unmade. It reeked of depression. I should have hired a maid to clean the place while I was away. Fortunately, the time in the sun had paid off. I spent my first night back cleaning, organizing, and turning the house back into a home. My head hit the pillow at 10 p.m. By 10:01, I was asleep. Then came the scratching. I knew at once that it was an animal. It sounded like a cat, panicked or upset, clawing at the door. It wanted in. Or maybe it wanted out. I'm still not sure. I was fearless then. I grabbed a flashlight and set out for the attic, yanked it down, lowered the ladder, and started my climb. I don't know what I was expecting, bird or raccoon. Whatever it was, that wasn't what I found. Instead, as my head breached the threshold, I saw a monster. A black shape looming in the corner, darker than the shadows around it. 2 red gleaming eyes, a body that whispered like leather when it moved. And my God, did it move. It ducked down to all fours, laying flat against the attic floor. When its arms spread out to either side, I saw the webbed wings stretching from its wrists to its ribcage. I saw its claws and its teeth. I heard it snarl and spit. I moved the beam of my flashlight to its face. It was a bat. From its feet to its shoulders, it looked like a man, but there was no mistaking that face. It was a bat. As soon as the light settled in its eyes, creature shrieked. It shielded its eyes with a winged forearm and scurried right towards me. I half jumped, half crawled to the opening of the attic. I dropped the flashlight. I fell. I landed hard, but not hard enough to stop running. I could hear it closing in over my head. I rolled onto my feet and sprinted clumsily for the nearest door. I locked myself in the bathroom. On the other side of the door, I heard the monster crash onto the floor. It yelled again, and I heard things breaking. Glass shattered, wood splintered. I heard the thud of the wall as it stumbled against them. I prayed. I don't know if it was out loud or in my mind, but I know I prayed. I begged God to spare me from this thing. It was stupid, I know. I'm sure it sounds even crazier than it feels. But it happened, and praying was all I could think to do. Eventually, I heard it hit the front door. I heard it swing open. I held my breath, and I waited. It took hours, but eventually I worked up the courage to open the door. Inside my house, everything had been destroyed. It was even worse than the way I found it that morning. My coffee table was broken. An entire cabinet in the kitchen had been knocked from the wall, its contents laying shattered on my tile. I called the police. They sent me to a hospital, not just to check for wounds. In there, I learned just how unbelievable my story was. The next day, I cleaned again. I tossed the table and I repaired the cabinet. I put everything right in the house again and decided to never speak of the thing in my attic again. I was done with it, but it hasn't been done with me. I can still hear it scratching. I begged God then. I'm begging you now. I need to be told what to do. There's no clear answer, not for me. There's no one I can turn to. There's no forum online just waiting for me to stumble upon it. I could move, I guess, but what if the scratching follows me? If it's all in my head, the house doesn't matter. Where I live doesn't matter. If it's all in my head now, maybe it was then too. How do I check if that's true? How do I check if something's wrong with me? If I imagined it all? If I had broken all that stuff myself, wouldn't there have been injuries on my body? What's worse, I know, is the other option. The worst case scenario is that everything is true. The monster really does exist. The worst case scenario is that the scratching comes back. I wake up, I search, and I find it. One of these times it has to be there. It's going to get in the same way it did then, and then it'll be too late. Please, give me your advice. Tell me what this thing was. Tell me what it was doing in my house and what it wanted from me. The next time I see it, I want to be prepared. I don't want my legs to shake the next time I climb that ladder. I don't want to live my life afraid of the scratching. I live in central Pennsylvania, dead smack in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. If hiking in nature is your thing, then this place is paradise. Otherwise, well, there isn't much going on. I spend a lot of time up in the mountains, as much as possible, really. I don't have a girlfriend or many friends, and my parents moved to Florida a few years ago. So, all of my free time is spent hiking and exploring the ridges and the trails. I considered myself to be somewhat of an expert on all the nearby hiking trails, and thought there was little left more for me to see, and no more surprises to be had. I was dead wrong. On this particular day, I set off early in the morning. I usually only carried a little water and a light lunch. Even being as seasoned as I was, I didn't really want to get caught outside in the mountains on a cold January night, and had planned to be off the trail and back to my car before dark. I spent the first few hours walking one of my typical trails, even ran into a fellow hiker who I knew well. We walked together for a bit until around noon, when she said she had to start heading back to get ready for a date. Lucky her. Continuing by myself and eating my sandwich on the go, I eventually came across a small trail leading off from the main one. This did surprise me a little bit, as I'd been on this trail dozens of times and had never seen this cutoff before. It wasn't intentionally cleared, more like a game trail, but definitely a bit wider than you'd expect a deer to make. Thinking what the hell, and excited for a new experience, I turned off the main trail into the cutoff. It was a pretty direct trail, almost a straight line with very few twists and turns. One thing I noticed was the number of broken branches and twigs scattered across the forest floor. Looking up at the overhanging trees, I spotted a few places where branches had obviously broken off. Some were as high as 8 feet off the ground. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe some kids had come up here acting goofy or something. I walked on for about another 20 minutes, eventually coming upon a stream running down from the mountain. I was intrigued by the stream, as I had no idea where it came from or where it ended up, so I followed it upstream a bit. Then I found it. A cave, set back into the side of the mountain. The stream continued past it, maybe 10 yards away. Caves aren't exactly common here, and seeing this one made my heart leap with excitement. Of course, there was always the possibility that some kind of predator inhabited the cave, most likely a black bear. I decided that the chance to explore something new was just too good of a chance to pass up, so I started walking toward it. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Rancid, like meat that had been left out in the sun to spoil for a week. Mix that with damp fur and rotted wood, and you get an idea of the aroma I was experiencing. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but I headed it anyway. I used my phone flashlight when I got close and noticed something odd on the walls of the cave. Some kinds of art, which reminded me of cave paintings made by early humans. Except the figure in the rough painting didn't look anything like a human. They were much taller and wider, almost twice the size of a normal guy. I had no idea what kind of material was used. It was a splotchy red material. I followed the cave deeper. The further I went, the more intense the smell became. I put my sleeve over my nose and mouth, but it didn't do much to help. The cave curved to the right, and as I came around the bend, it widened considerably into a chamber. I was stunned by what I saw. Ornaments, I guess you could call them, were strung up along the ceiling of the cave. Lengths of vine tied together with various animal bones hung down like sick party streamers. More bones were scattered across the floor. Against one of the walls of the cave stood a 5-foot length of wood, a stone tip lashed to the end of it like a primitive spear. Across the chamber, stretched out on what looked like a bed of leaves, lay a massive, thick-furred creature. I'm not sure how I missed it initially, but it looked like it was sleeping, its chest rising and falling rhythmically. This wasn't a bear, and I wasn't too keen to find out what it was, so I began a slow backward retreat to the cave exit, eyes transfixed on the sleeping thing. I only made it a few steps before my head bumped into one of the hanging streams of bone. I had barely even nudged it, but sure enough, it fell to the floor with a clatter. The creature snapped straight upright, yellow eyes glaring in my direction. Without a second thought, I turned and bolted the way I had come. I heard a string of grunts behind me, accompanied by the clattering of the bone decorations. It was after me. I made it out of the cave into the sunlight, the sudden glare momentarily blinding me. Another threatening grunt was behind me, and I was snapped out of it and off running through the forest. I ran for what seemed like a mile, fortunately with no sign of pursuit. I made it back to the trailhead where I parked my car. I jumped in and peeled out with no intention of ever coming back. And I haven't. Back when I was in college, my little hometown in Indiana was always a very happy place for me. I'd always look forward to when I could go home. My family was awesome, and I had a lot of friends there, even though I went to school out of state. One of my favorite places to go when I went home is the Mill Race Park. When I was a kid, it was a sketchy part of town that we were all told to avoid. But right around the time I started high school, there was a huge effort by the city to refurbish it. The language they used around the park was to turn it into a diamond. The most notable changes were large metal structures painted bright red. It had a boathouse, a river lookout, a fishing pier, an amphitheater, and reasonably clean public bathrooms. My story takes place during the spring break of my freshman year. I really wanted to save money, so I opted out of the tropical vacations and cruises my friends were taking. Besides, I was tired from school and just wanted a week to relax. I booked my ticket home and arrived in Columbus late on a Saturday night. It was nice to see my family and a few of my friends, but I quickly found myself getting bored. After my third day of watching TV and staring at my phone, I decided to go for a bike ride. I suited up in some riding clothes and dug out my childhood mountain bike from the depths of the garage. I set out with no destination in mind. My only thought was to avoid the highway. Riding up there would be too dangerous. Looking back, that probably would have been the safer option. I decided I'd just go to Millrace Park and poke around. In no time, I was at the entrance. Immediately, I was struck by how beautiful the park was. All around me were families, dog walkers, and bikers enjoying the day. Being in the park made me feel strangely patriotic. The park felt so representative of all the cool things about my hometown. I wasn't paying attention to the turns I was making. I was also just lost in my thoughts. Before long, I completely lost my bearings and reached a dead end. There was one decrepit picnic table, so I sat down. I pulled out my phone to locate myself in the park, but the battery was dead. Something about being lost in such a familiar place made me panic a little bit. It may seem silly, but I honestly had no idea how I ended up where I did. I managed to calm myself down a little bit. If I turned around, I would have to find my way back to something recognizable. That was the only direction available after all. Right when I decided to set out again, I heard something. Twigs snapping. Footsteps crunching through the woods. Whatever it was clearly treading carefully. The steps also sounded heavy, like a grown man. Moving slowly, I scanned in the woods around me. Nothing. I did a lap near the picnic table. Still nothing. I was a little spooked, so I set out again on my bike. I was a little ways down the path and I was quickly out of breath. Turning around for a moment, I saw that my back wheel was flat. While I turned around, I went to hit the brakes, but hit them a little too hard. Long story short, I ended up flinging myself over the handlebars. Thank goodness I was wearing my helmet. I wasn't injured, but I had a few scrapes and bruises. I pulled myself off the road and sat for a moment to gather myself and catch my breath. That's when I heard the noises again. Snapping twigs, careful, diligent steps in the woods. This time it was very close, right behind me. Summoning some courage, I turned around. It must have been 10 feet away from me. It had the body of a person standing on 2 legs. It had to be over 7 feet tall. Its hands had large claws and it smelled like rotten eggs. It was looking directly at me, and when we made eye contact, it hissed loudly. Then it started taking steps towards me, slow, then faster. Forgetting about my bike and my cuts and bruises, I turned and ran down the path as fast as I could. With every one of my steps, I could hear its feet slapping against the pavement. The rotten egg smell filled my nose and I coughed hard, but I didn't stop. 100 yards ahead of me, I saw an intersection and some people on bikes. Suddenly, the thing behind me lunged and grabbed onto my shirt. I tripped and fell onto the road. I turned around and the thing was standing above me. It had large human eyes and sharp teeth. I ended up kicking it around the knees and ran back to the more populated part of the park. I went home and tried to tell my family about it. They could tell I was scared, and my dad drove back to get my bike. But when he got back home, he said he couldn't find it. Wherever it wasn't there anymore. I'm always a bit more nervous when I'm in my hometown, and I don't think I'll ever go to Millrace Park again.